name is Ananya. I am the co-chair for WCAPS Climate Change Working Group. I am a youth peace advocate, feminist activist, researcher, and writer based in India. I work in the areas of human rights, gender, peace, security, and climate. I will be the moderator for today's WCAPS Climate Change Working Group's webinar series on climate careers. And we hope that with this series, we build a strong sense of how to find and explore careers in climate spaces. The WCAPS Climate Change Working Group's mission is to create a space for women of color in climate-related discussions and initiatives. Our goal is to maintain a platform where women of color will build discussions on climate-related issues, in addition to building a network where organizations and experts in fieldwork hand in hand to share solutions on how to best solve and heal our planet. In our last session, we explored climate-related careers in academia. Today, we will have the second of 4 Climate Career Series webinars, where we hope to share multiple entry points to careers that support and build awareness of climate change issues, as well as build stronger policies and systems to protect our world. During this session, you will see a Q&A box where you can share additional questions, comments, and ideas during the conversation. We will try to address as many questions as possible within our time frame. Before we start, I'm honored to introduce our wonderful speaker, Dr. Stephen Hammer. Dr. Stephen Hammer currently serves as an advisor focused on international climate policy and strategy with the World Bank's Climate Change Group in Washington, D.C. In this role, he serves as a key policy advisor to WBG senior management and leads the bank's climate finance-related engagement with the G7, G20, and UNFCCC. He represents the World Bank on numerous global commissions and working groups focused on climate finance, and was one of the key movers behind creation of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, a group which he continues to advise on strategic matters. In 2021, he chaired the global working group focused on the Paris alignment of MDB lending portfolios. He previously served as manager of climate policy on the World Bank Group, where he led an interdisciplinary team of 60-plus scientists, economists, technical experts, and consultants focused on frontier research on climate change and development topics, the mainstreaming of climate change in World Bank operations, and the provision of climate-related advisory services to clients and bank teams. Prior to assuming this role, he was global lead, shaping the bank's work on cities and climate change. Before joining the World Bank, Dr. Hammer was a professor at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning, DUSP. He also previously taught at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, the Milano School of Policy Management and Environment, and Pratt Institute. We are extremely honored to have him here with us today. Climate is a broad and diverse field. You can enter the sector from multiple paths, either from STEM through the tech and innovation approach, through a policy and international relations background, through a human rights background, etc. The possibilities are endless. Yet, climate as a sector remains a niche and unconventional career option in many regions. As such, people have to often rely on international and foreign country organizations and offices for jobs. Getting access to information on how to approach these work opportunities and the scope in the field has been a struggle that all of us have faced at some point. Through our Climate Career Series, we wish to make information regarding climate-related careers accessible to people and provide a support system that helps them enter this field of work. The focus of this conversation with Steve is understanding a possible career path to supporting public policies that allow for growth in green technologies, sustainable development, and sustainable urban planning. Through this conversation, we will also explore his journey to becoming the advisor, focusing on international climate policy and strategy with the World Bank's Climate Change Group. Thank you for joining us today, Steve. It's an honor to have you here.
Thanks, Ananya. It's great to be with you all.
So, as we begin, can you tell us more about your journey into the climate space and what led you to the world of public policy?
Sure. Well, thank you again for the opportunity. It's great to meet you all. This is something I enjoy doing, is talking to people early in their career about different opportunities and career paths along the way. Mine has been one of lots of shifts, different different ways of entering the conversation. I was an environmental policy undergraduate major at university, and then followed that up with a graduate degree in public policy. And so my academic training was always very focused on the policy world. And that was just, public school teachers as parents, I'm not certain, if that was the driver, but the idea of trying to influence, where we were heading in terms of environmental protection, environmental quality, that was something that was ingrained in me from a very early age. Professionally, as I said, I've had a variety of different types of work over my career. I started out in local government in the United States. And then once I got married and my wife wanted to go back and get her PhD, we moved and ended up in state level government. And then I ended up as a consultant for many years. And it was after that I decided that I wanted to try my hand at teaching. And so I ended up with a part-time teaching position at a graduate program in New York City. That led to an interest in going back and getting a PhD and trying my hand at that full-time. And then it was a matter of my being recruited to join the World Bank because of the specific expertise that I had focused on cities and climate change. And because I had started in local government, that tier or that aspect of the question was always one that was near and dear to me. And I liked the fact that you could work on policy issues and really see the impacts tomorrow on the ground, because they could be fairly immediate when you're working at the local government level. But when I began to migrate from, I started out working on solid waste issues, and then I got more into environmental management questions, and that led me to some engagement with the private sector. I really enjoyed, those kinds of issues, circular economy, but it was more because of some professional relationships I had. I started thinking more about renewable energy, and part of that was also driven very personally by a small property that my wife and I had, where we actually that was off the grid, and we actually thought about installing solar power, and so that's what we did. And that was back in the mid 90s, so we were very early adopters of that technology, and that really opened up a lot of new doors for me in terms of the kinds of issues that one thinks about. And I started thinking more about energy supply and energy distribution in an urban area, and that was what I did my PhD on, looking at New York City, looking at London, and that again created all of these opportunities because those were two cities that were very proactive on this issue. Again, they were really early adopters in terms of some of their big picture policy efforts, Plan YC in New York and the London Plan, the London Energy Strategy. And it was because of that when I finished my doctoral work and I was doing teaching and research at Columbia, I started getting invited by other cities and other countries to come talk about those issues, and that ultimately led to my being invited to join the World Bank group. So, in terms of a path, it was one with a few twists and turns along the way. The thing that I really emphasize to people when I'm chatting about it is, the need to create opportunities for yourself. And so that was through volunteering. It was through participation in some boards of local environmental organizations. really, it created relationships and opportunities for me to expand my knowledge, and in some cases, employment opportunities would arise out of that I found very helpful, and that allowed me to land where I ultimately did at the World Bank. So hopefully that's a good place. You can see there's many things we might talk about how each of those decisions came about, but all of that relates to I think that the decisions and circumstances we find ourselves in, whether it's the place we live and the number of opportunities that exist in that locale, whether you have a family and obligations or considerations that you would need to keep in mind in terms of your flexibility to travel, or your ability to engage in extracurricular activities beyond your primary place of work. So all of those things factor in, and it becomes a very personal set of decisions that you make along the way. But that's why I think it's important to try and give yourself the flexibility by through the things that you may study, through the things that you may choose to keep current on in terms of policy or technology or finance considerations, that again, they gave me the platform I needed to advance.
That's truly fascinating. And I think when we hear people like you speak, the first question that a lot of youngsters have is what sort of work that you do? What does your day look like at the World Bank? And what work that the climate change group does? And that's obviously keeping in mind that you've come here after years and years of experience, and probably the day that it looks like right now, it's vastly different from how you started off your career. But I think it's fascinating to understand how you work, how the World Bank and the climate change group works. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I'll go back and talk about kind of what the first job I had was like in a minute. But my current job is very flexible in terms of the issues that I'm asked to weigh in on. Most recently I led the bank group's engagement at COP27 in Egypt. And so that was the culmination of 10 months of planning as we were trying to figure out how we wanted to position ourselves post Glasgow on the issues where multilateral development banks like the World Bank Group were being asked to lean forward and do more in terms of financing climate action on the ground, do more in terms of sharing knowledge with both countries, subnational entities, but also the private sector. Because one thing that's quite unique about the World Bank Group compared to many other similar institutions is it's the global reach. It is the World Bank, not a regional bank. It is an institution that has both a public and a private sector arm. And so you end up touching so many issues that are related to all aspects of development. Unlike some of the other development finance institutions around the world, which have tried to position themselves or are now repositioning themselves as the climate bank for the European Union, for example, we maintain a very clear development orientation and really emphasize that a lot of the climate work that we engage in is done as not the primary reason that we're undertaking that work, but because there are clear co-benefits, what we characterize as co-benefits, alongside the core development challenge that we were trying to help our clients address. So if they have traffic congestion in cities, yes, you can talk about public transportation, you can talk about electric vehicles, you can talk about non-motorized forms of transport, walking, biking, scooters, what have you, that have a climate mitigation benefit, but it was because of the traffic, it was because of the air pollution, it was because of the road safety concerns that our clients were generally starting that conversation with us. And as we begin to engage with them, then it's one of, well, how can you also take account of some of these climate issues? And that's something that the World Bank Group has done, much more consistently in recent years. Again, I joined a decade ago, and when I first joined, I was the first global lead on cities and climate change. And we had a team of 650 people around the world who were focused on urban issues. And I just remember, being at some meetings, and the question would come up and they'd say, oh, Steve, he does that. He's the guy. He's our climate guy. And it's like, no, that's actually not true. I'm not the only one who's thinking about these issues, because, again, so many of my colleagues were working on land use planning. They were working on air quality issues. They were working on urban food issues. They were working on solid waste management, wastewater, flood management. All of these issues have linkages, strong linkages, very close linkages back to climate change. But again, folks weren't putting climate in front of that, those questions or projects that we were doing. And we were doing it because there was a traffic problem, there was an air quality problem, there's a public health problem. And climate came in as a yet another good reason why you would want to tackle these issues. So that was the first part of, when I joined the bank, was, again, thinking about this at the urban level. And then I moved over to the global climate team, where I ran the policy shop that was responsible for trying to mainstream climate change into all of our projects, so that we were more consistent in our thinking of, when you have a lending project or a technical assistance project, how can you raise climate? How can you present different options to the client in a way that they can begin to understand the climate linkages, and then make decisions based on that. And then after doing that for several years, I was asked, and because the bank was beginning to become a more active player globally, I was asked to step up and really serve as our climate policy envoy globally, talking about these issues in some of the major international fora. So like the climate COP process, like the G7 and the G20. So it has been a journey, but the work I did on the ground in different countries in Romania and Ethiopia and Vietnam and elsewhere really informed this global policy work that I do, because you can link the global policy narrative back to what it means on the ground, what are the benefits on the ground, what are the challenges on the ground, and you make very abstract policy ideas very tangible and very relevant to people's lives.
And what kind of skills did you develop in your journey that helped you in your career over the years?
Yeah, I think there are a few. So again, I had a policy training. So that was, policy analysis, that was quantitative analysis. So statistics, benefit cost analysis. That was, for a lot of the early jobs that I ended up in government, those were very fundamental, very relevant. But it's become pretty clear at different, through different engagement that I've had, that you can come with a scientific background, you can come with an engineering background, and learn those policy skills along the way. So I don't think that anybody is necessarily at a disadvantage when you're in the job. Sometimes it's harder to get the job if you don't have that on your CV or as part of your training. But again, I think that there are so many ways to enter the climate sphere, that sometimes you can work your way in and then begin to slowly shift from one type of activity to the next, and that is how you build the skills. And also, reinforce this idea that some of the volunteer activities I did with different environmental organizations gave me the opportunity to learn about new topics, new technologies, but also pick up different skills along the way, because I'd be, more the junior person working with someone who's more advanced on some of those efforts. The other thing that I really have found very important, and I now it's fundamental to my project, but I still remember back in graduate school how public speaking was just something that absolutely terrified me. And, getting practice at that and forcing yourself into those situations is really important. Understanding how to present yourself publicly and present in a way that's very clear, to your audience is something that's very valuable and very helpful as you advance in your career. And how did I do that? I actually started teaching, and I forced myself to get up in front of a group of students and start talking about that. They, I'm not going to say they were the guinea pigs for me, but they taught me a lot in terms of helping you quickly understand whether people are understanding what you're presenting, whether you're rambling or whether you're not answering a question directly, because you'd either have engaged looks staring back at you, or you'd have people, with a very quizzical look on their face saying, I have no clue what you're talking about, buddy. So, those are that's an important skill set that I think is helpful. And then the final thing, always is the ability to, present yourself in written form. And not everybody's a great researcher, but being able to communicate clearly on the page, whether it's a short memo or whether it's a longer report, those are skills that I continue to see as having, relevance in a lot of the area, a lot of the work that I'm involved in these days.
And you have a history of working with youth groups, which is a key segment that this group also targets. So, what advice would you have for members of our audience who are like students trying to crack into the climate career space? What sort of advice you'll give them, and what sort of sectors do you see having the most opportunities right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I continue to, informally advise many folks who approach me on LinkedIn or other professional networks. A lot of young people approach me at different international fora and ask if they could have coffee, and I'm always happy to do that, because people did that for me early in my career, and so I really feel like it's my obligation to repay that. There are again lots of ways that you can enter the field, and in the policy world, that's one avenue. I think you want to take account of a few different things. One is geographic limitations to your search, and interestingly for me, even though I was living and working in New York City for so many years, and there was a big environmental, set of issues, a number of groups that were very involved in this. The professional opportunities were actually rather limited. There were some major NGOs or CSOs, depending on how you know them in your country. Civil society groups who were very active on this, and they had a national or international focus beyond just a neighborhood or community scale orientation, because that's what I wanted to do. I was always trying to understand, have impact at the national level. Who did I work? Who should I be talking to? Who should I be working with along the way? Local government, subnational government is actually an excellent training ground for people early in their careers. And partly it's because there's, I think, growing momentum behind these issues in terms of quality of life, in terms of a policy imperative that's either been imposed locally or imposed at the national level, that cities need to do more on this. And so I've always found that, starting out in local government actually gives you many, many opportunities. And one of the really amazing things from my perspective is how quickly you can move, or how quickly you can be given responsibilities that you might not otherwise be given if you were in a consulting firm, or if you were at in the private sector. So I've encourage people to look at that. There are different ways in. You either can apply directly into the type of position you want on the climate team or on the environmental team or the transportation team. Or many cities have fellowships, which are specifically intended often for underrepresented groups, to gain entree to a job in City Hall. And they may last for 9 months or 12 months or 2 years. But those are great entry level opportunities in the US. I can think of a few different groups that have that, and I know that similar opportunities exist in other major cities around the world. But again, that's great because it gives you exposure both to the issues. You'll learn a little bit about how the government works, and you've built this network in that 9 months or 2 years, however long it is, that you can then translate that into your next position. So that's one. Otherwise, environmental organizations, often are looking for analyst level, recruits, because you're the ones who are doing a lot of the chasing of information or some of the data analysis that then gets translated into their advocacy campaigns or the research that they're publishing. Increasingly, you're seeing a lot of work by consulting firms who are getting more engaged in this space. They're working both for public and private clients. On the public side, again, it's because governments are trying to figure out how do we, address this issue in the most cost-effective manner. How do we do that within our current budget envelope that we have available? And so they need some technical expertise from consulting firms to do that. On the private sector side, there's been this massive growth in terms of companies who are paying attention to climate and environmental protection issues. And given that COP15 is going on in Montreal right now, nature and biodiversity protection is another area that firms are beginning to pay attention to, both because their stockholders or shareholders are demanding it, but also because corporate policies are shifting in this direction, and companies feel that for economic resilience purposes, they need to protect themselves and make sure that they don't have legal liability, they don't have supply chain issues over time, and so they're paying attention to that as well. And so if a lot of the younger folks that I'm talking to see these ESG positions as a great first entry level opportunity, and you are doing the greenhouse gas emission inventory for the company, you are doing the risk assessment of supply chains, or looking at how to green up corporate operations in different ways. And that's a fantastic foundation for anybody to get some really juicy work, and then you can move within the industry, your particular sector that you're in, or you can move into consulting firms or across to other companies, because so many folks are focused on that right now. So many opportunities. It's really a function if you want to work public or private. Interestingly, because we wanted to talk about policy, I'm seeing that a lot of the policy is emerging from the decisions that the private firms are making, and they're trying to influence government policymakers to say, hey, let us do this on our own, or we as an industry are going to try and come up with our own voluntary standards that we can follow, so you don't need to regulate us in a certain way or impose restrictions on what we do. And so you can even enter into the policy conversation even when you're working in the private sector, because the effort to advance or standardize how folks are thinking about sustainability, how folks are thinking about climate protection or ESG rules, is something that the private sector obviously wants to influence that conversation based on their own experience.
And what advice would you have for students from marginalized communities who are just getting started? Because they obviously might face a lot of hurdles in accessing a lot of these opportunities that there are.
Yeah, that's a perennial challenge. Again, partly it's a matter of geography and how much, are there opportunities where you are, or do you need to move to another location where the professional opportunities may be greater. Again, you may have very personal reasons for wanting to live in one location or another, and that will necessarily influence what opportunities you have. But I think that trying to engage with some of the voluntary activities. You may not work in the field right now, but you can learn a lot by becoming actively involved in community groups or, citywide groups or regional groups who are focused on environmental protection. Or, there are even social networks in many of the cities that, I've worked in over the years. There are what's known as green drinks initiatives, which is, and again, it's purely social, but you can meet other people who are working in that sector in similar industries. All of them have similar interest in terms of climate or environmental protection, and you can meet people from all walks of life and hear about where there are opportunities. So different ways that again come from purely looking at what's available locally, professionally, doing it more from a volunteer type approach to something that's more purely social. I think there are a lot of different doors that you can walk through that will give you entree to some of these issues. And your university, if you've studied a related field, your faculty or the school is probably interested in helping to enhance their reputation by where their graduates are, and so they may be very open to sharing information about opportunities that they're hearing about.
And for young students who wish to enter the climate policy sphere, what sort of degrees or subjects should they be choosing at their undergrad or postgrad level that can help them enter the field?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily let me back up. Yes, the degree will matter depending on the kind of position that you're pursuing. If you're working for more of a technically focused firm, they're going to be looking for someone who has a technical background, on water quality or on, quantifying, degradation or resilience. And so engineering degrees or more of the STEM degrees, are clearly going to be linked to different kinds of positions. Policy, on the other hand, you don't need to have a particular kind of training. I chose to do that with my undergraduate degree. But when I ended up in graduate school, I was meeting people, and I did a graduate degree that obviously went further than what my undergraduate degree taught me. But I was in class with people who were, humanities majors who, really came to what they wanted to do through very different paths. Again, they saw problems in their community and they decided that they wanted to go, to a graduate program that would give them the skills so that they could tackle them more directly. But the, different populations, I think, are all ending up in different kinds of degree programs. If you look at a business school these days, they all have sustainability programs. They all have sustainability courses. If you go to policy schools, they're again, many of them are teaching you, issues about nature, biodiversity, or climate as core parts of the coursework. If you're in, again, a more technical program, even folks who may have anticipated that they were going to have a more technical career are beginning to link it more towards understanding where the policy environment is heading, because that will help you understand the kinds of issues that you would need to create the technical solutions for. So, all different, many different, undergraduate majors or graduate degrees, can have relevance. The other thing I want to say, however, is again, going back to something that's more of a pure humanities degree, where, what are you good at? You're good at trying to piece different types of information together and to extract the bigger lessons from it all. You are learning, your research skills, your writing skills are all very important. And so I think all of that helps, and it is how you then position yourself as part of your job search, that you may not have had the exact coursework on how to do a scope 3 greenhouse gas emission inventory, but you are someone who has had experience, quickly picking up different kinds of information and piecing it together and developing a logic, a narrative to it, and communicating that clearly. And employers want that.
And although we have covered this question a bit, but I'll ask it again in case there's something more you want to add. What sort of internships should students and young professionals be looking at? I know you mentioned about government levels, local government levels, and volunteerships, but anything else they should particularly be focusing on?
And again, I think it's, where do you want to land? So if you want to end up in the private sector, then again, the number of entry-level internships who are giving you experience on the sustainability team or on tasks or research projects that are looking at how my company, might do things differently in the future, those are really valuable experiences. The internships in the policy world often, sorry, I'm just getting a little too much glare. The many of the CSOs, the civil society groups or nonprofit groups who focus on these issues, they're always recruiting interns, because that's their pipeline of future employees, as people who want to get exposure to the issues, the research projects that they're working on, and they want to see, what talent is coming up through the ranks. So I think that, again, I won't say there's a particular kind of internship that is most helpful. I think that as an employer, I want to see people who have, demonstrated interest in the field, and they've shown that through some of the projects they've done. Again, either professional work opportunities or through volunteer activities. Those can each have equal resonance for me when I'm looking at a CV. I think it is a matter of presentation. It is a matter of being able to tell your story once you have the opportunity to have that interview. So, I'm very open-minded in terms of, who I would hire, in terms of who I'll consider for a position, but I want a clear, demonstrated commitment to work on the issues, because that's what I need at the end of the day. Someone who's pretty passionate about helping us make progress, regardless of whether I was recruiting a student for a research project I was running while a professor, or in my consulting firm, and we didn't have a lot of money, but I wanted to help create opportunities for people to get some work experience. And again, I wanted to hire the people who were most enthusiastic about that.
That is kind of very reassuring to hear. Is public policy one of the spaces that we should consider as a place for opportunity and career growth?
I mean, look, you're talking to a guy who did an undergraduate and graduate degree in public policy, and then a PhD in urban planning. So I will say yes. There's clearly a role for that, and I've had a very interesting career because of the academic training that I've received. But again, I'm increasingly, convinced that doesn't need to be the only way to do it. Again, if you are interested in working in a company that deploys the technology, the green technologies that we need more of, whether it's on heavy industry or transportation or clean energy, you can learn a lot about the policy world, because your firm is having to try and position itself in trying to understand where the market opportunities are best, or how we exploit the new rules and regulations that may create some opportunities for us. And so you will get good training there. If you want more experience in terms of kind of picking apart or developing some of the policies, then yeah, some of the academic programs that give you very explicit coursework requirements or writing requirements that force you to go look at the new law and analyze it in the following way. That is a very tangible experience that you can then translate into a future job. So it need not be the only way in. It is a very strong way to enter the field, because, and I think increasingly you're seeing situations where because of the growth in the number of government entities at the local and regional and national level who are paying attention to this, I think the size of the workforce that they need has simply expanded. And so in that regard, it's very common for them to go to a public policy school, public administration program, to look for talent going forward.
And how does public policy, particularly in urban planning, offer opportunities to bring more diversity into the workplace?
Well, that's a function of how committed the institution is to that issue. I think there's growing recognition from social pressure that firms and government agencies who are not paying attention to this are going to get called out if they're not paying attention to that issue. They need a workforce that is as diverse and representative as the population they're intended to serve. And the logic of why you do that, because you then have different sets of ideas and values and experiences that improves the quality of your policy making, because it addresses a larger community than if we're only students who are coming out of a different or very narrow type of academic training or lived experience. They're going to have a worldview, but it may not be a representative worldview. And so government agencies have long represented the need for a very diverse workforce. Companies are increasingly in the same situation, that they, it may force them to open their eyes. Having a more diverse workforce helps open their eyes to different market opportunities, because they may have, again, only looked at a certain market segment because of that's one that their workforce knew. But if you have a more diverse workforce, then they're going to be able to think a bit more expansively about where there are opportunities to transact business, because they may see opportunities where someone who looks like me may not have recognized that, because that was just not part of my lived experience.
And what do you envision to be the future of the sector?
The sustainability sector, it's Nick Stern, Professor Nick Stern, or Lord Stern from London School of Economics, calls it the growth opportunity of the 21st century. And he's been saying that publicly for the better part of 20 years. And what does that mean? That there is no viable path forward for society except to take this on and address some of these, climate challenges that are increasingly, facing all of us, and that the economic opportunities are that exist as a way of capitalizing on addressing those risks or concerns, that creates economic opportunity. So it's both a defensive approach, which means that we have to do it. But if you're interested, if you think that there may be a way to make some money off of this, to provide, be that provider of clean technology or green transportation options, then there's money to be made. And I think that what we're increasingly seeing, and that's why there was the largest population ever largest crowd ever to attend one of the climate summits in Egypt. I think it ended up at 47,000 registrants at the end. By far the biggest group. And so a lot of private sector representatives there, people who are beginning to understand that, we've never been to one of these kinds of events before, but it's important for us to go because we need to understand where the policy world is heading, but also to learn more about the opportunities that are profiled, at these kinds of events where you do have people demonstrating technologies or telling about their success stories as they grew a particular market segment in a particular country.
And if you could look into the future, which areas do you foresee there to be a stronger need for public policy in climate change? And what are some of the niche areas that you would recommend our audience to look further into?
Well, in climate world, it often gets divided into three areas. One is mitigation activities. What can you do that'll reduce the contribution of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere? And so there you can work on questions related to heavy industry. The US and the EU just started talking about a new green steel club that they would like to create. So, whether it's heavy industry or whether it's, transportation options or whether it's clean energy technologies, you can look at all of those. But then there's we're not moving fast enough. And so adaptation concerns are paramount. Well, again, do you need to worry about resilience of the energy sector? If you, look at in the United States, California has become well known, and some of the Western United States have become well known because of the big wildfires that have actually damaged a lot of the electricity distribution lines in the West. And so, you even have adaptation needed for basic infrastructure like energy, power distribution. But if you look in other countries around the world where floods have been prominent, again, other forms of infrastructure have needed, adaptation or resilience measures developed to keep those systems operating even in the wake of big floods or storms. So again, mitigation, adaptation, opportunities in either realm, and it's something that if you have a personal interest in one area or another, then you can pursue that. And then there's that third world, which is the question of finance. How do you pay for any of the above? And you can use there are lots of opportunities as investment firms, as banks get more involved in the space about how can they help companies, help governments at all different levels pay for the necessary infrastructure changes or new technologies that they need deployed, and questions of understanding how different kinds of financing instruments, whether it's a loan or whether it's a guarantee or whether it's some type of bond or some other type of financial instrument that can help open up new marketplaces to attract different kinds of money to invest in these technologies. Expertise is needed in all of those areas.
Well, thank you for sharing such wonderful insights on approaching a career in climate change through the lens of public policy. I think above and beyond everything else, it's extremely reassuring to hear that it's never too late to enter the climate field, and even for people starting out, that no matter what career path they choose, if they have a continued commitment, they can carve a space for themselves in this broad, vast, and diverse sector. And I believe that the greatest merit of our talk today has been that the amazing advice that Dr. Hammer has given, it applies to all of us, irrespective of which place we are located in or which kind of social order we come from. So with everything that's been spoken, we have received some questions, and I know we are running a little bit behind schedule. We do not want to take up too much of our time of our audience or of our honorable speaker, so we'll just turn to the questions. The first question is, would you recommend studying policy or earning a certificate Does that help to give an edge in the field?
I would say yes, because again, it's validation by an accredited institution that you have certain skill sets. So again, whether it's a certificate that says you know how to do risk assessments or you know how to do greenhouse gas accounting, I may be looking to fill a very specific need on my team, and so having it very clear that the person has that skill set, that's very valuable. But that can be a short-term certificate that you can get in a matter of weeks or months, compared to an academic degree where I would expect that the training will be a bit broader, that you would have a broader set of skills that I might be able to utilize in the course of many different projects that I'm trying to have a team work on. Yeah, in that regard, knowing that someone has that kind of policy background is helpful. And I know that because, again, I'm a product of that world. And so I would have some understanding of what basic training that individual would have received. Now, again, I want to go back to some of the earlier questions about does the fact that I'm a product of the policy world mean that I only look for folks who have that background? It depends on the kinds of needs that I have in terms of filling slots within my team. And that's where it's a matter of how you present yourself. So yes, it's easy for me to see and look at under the university or education that you have a particular kind of degree or not, but also the kinds of work experience that you have. And so that's where the ability to package yourself and package your skills and package your interest in the field is really important. And communicating that effectively in your CV is, I think, really critical, because I want to know the very tangible skill sets or experiences that you would be bringing to the team. And I would compare that equally with someone who has a proven academic training in that area, but may not have the same type of the same level of work experience as another candidate. So I don't look only at the education box on a CV, and if you don't have a policy degree, I would never consider you. That's not the way it works. We need to be open-minded, because we have to recognize that we need a diverse workforce. I can't only have policy folks on my team. That's just not that's gonna be too narrow in terms of the skill sets that I need. I need technical people, who are agronomists or who are engineers or who are water quality folks, because that is going to be an important skill set in addition to the climate policy work that I need done.
The next question we have, and we might take that as the last question because we are running out of time. It's exploring the options of volunteering. Sitting on boards is a great suggestion as a way to find new opportunities, but how would one explore these kind of options? And perhaps where would one look for these sort of opportunities?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, I know volunteering, but also sitting on boards. And even as young people, there are a lot of youth groups that recruit young people to sit on their boards and as advisors. But where should one turn to look at for these opportunities?
No, I think you've identified them there. That a lot of there are youth groups that are coming up. There are now formal youth groups as part of the UNFCCC. The global climate policy process, that they have youth representatives, and there are now national youth groups that feed into that as they identify delegates to participate as a representative from a particular country or region. And that extends down to the community level as well. So universities are a great place to, first get exposed to some of these, and through that you can begin to learn more about where there may be opportunities for similar experiences as you get older. But I think if there is some type of green drinks, and again, that's a very particular, maybe it's only in the northern context that I've seen it, but there are social groups that have cropped up, and so you can find them on networks like LinkedIn. I think you can find them on other social networks as well. But usually universities and the career placement offices are really good places to start, because they will be aware of, they should be aware of these types of groups as a way to gain entree to the field.
Well, with that, we've come to the end of our session. Thank you so much, Dr. Hammer, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I think it has been so incredibly insightful, informative, but above all, very, very inspiring for all of us who have joined us today. And thank you, audience, for joining us today and being here with us. Hopefully, this is just the start of this conversation, and we hope to continue taking it forward and cover as many sectors and areas of work that we can. Today was such a treat for me, also, as I hope it was for all of you watching. Thank you once again. A couple of announcements before I go. In the chat box, we'll be sharing a link. It is for the Max Thabiso Atkins Climate Ambassador Program. And although we do realize that the ambassadors for this 2022 cohort have been selected, we believe that this is a kind of program that you can keep your eyes on for next year and onwards as a kind of space to start your work in the climate sector.
Actually,
Secondly,
can I jump
please,
in on
please.
that? Actually, the applications are open now for the next cohort, and I think they're not due till January. So please take a look at that. This is a program that the World Bank Group started. We have a youth engagement initiative at the bank that Max was involved in. Max was a dear friend of mine who was killed in the Ethiopia air crash a few years ago, and so the program has been renamed in his honor. But it is a fantastic opportunity for people, early in their career to. It's a 9-month program, I believe it is 6 or 9-month program, where you meet on a regular basis. You hear guest lecturers, and you get exposed to how the World Bank Group works, and it's a great way to meet people who are have similar interests from all over the world. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at that.
And if you have any topics that you would like the Climate Change Working Group to cover in the future, please do drop them in the chat box or write to us. We would love to hear from you. The next Climate Career series will be with Sonam Villani, founder and CEO of Street Life Ventures, and will be on 13th January at 12 p.m. ET. The registration details will be down in the chat box below. Also in the chat box, you'll see the link to joining the Climate Change Working Group listserv to stay aware of events and publications. We share not only about the events that we undertake, but also opportunities like the one we discussed above, as well as any other resources that we find to help our community. So please do join us. We hope that our family keeps growing and we continue to take on different sort of webinars and career in the Climate Career series to mainly address all the gaps of knowledge that's there and the needs of our members. So thank you so much once again for joining us. You'll see all the links have been posted in the chat. Our email address is also will be posted on the chat. So please write to us if you have suggestions. Shortly, we will also send in 1 or 2 days a link to the recording of this webinar for anybody who has missed or wants to take a look back at it again as a source of as a kind of resource. And we'll also share a feedback form. So please do remember to share your feedback with us. And thank you so much once again, Dr. Hammer, for being with us today, and to the lovely audience. Have a wonderful day ahead, and we'll see you again.